I'm the Executive Director of Family Promise of Ontario County.
Okay, what is Family Promise of Ontario County?
Okay. We are an emergency hospitality network is really how we started. We started with about 40 congregations that all wanted to achieve something that they couldn't do individually, and that was to stop area homelessness, family homelessness. And so they started an organization here. We are one of about 200 affiliates nationwide that we shelter families, and we keep families together. That's so important when you're a child and you've lost everything you have, and now you're going to a shelter. And if we remove a parent, particularly a father who may be more of kind of the safe person, the one that keeps them safe, and to have that person removed is really traumatic. So we shelter them together. And prior to COVID, we had 15 congregations that volunteered to let us bring our families at night. They would feed them supper and they would host them there overnight. And then they would come back to our day center. We couldn't commingle everyone together any longer once COVID came. So we rented initially just 3 apartments, and we've built that up over the past year. We're at 8 apartments right now that we're using for emergency shelter. So, and then in addition to that, we know that, maybe we served 14 families in our shelter this year, but we also served, I wish I had an exact number for you, but it's probably in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 families that came to us for emergency rental assistance or utility assistance. So we received funding that came with the Treasury funding from OTDA, which is our state. I'm not going to get that right. We'll cut that out.
That's fine. We can cut that out. It's not live or anything. We're good.
Okay.
So, homelessness, it looks like based on some of the statistics, it has the amount of homeless people living in our region or across New York State. Let me see. It says Department of Housing. Yeah, no, this is in the Finger Lakes. It says that homelessness has increased 215% since 2007. That sounds like a really big number. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, right along that time, the McKinney-Vento Act went into effect. And the McKinney-Vento Act says that any child that is not in a permanent home, meaning anybody that is, sleeping on a couch at a friend's house or at a relative's house, those people are doubled up. And so we never counted them before. We only counted the street homeless and the people that were coming to shelters. And in fact, 80% of the families who are experiencing homelessness are doubled up with someone, and we may or may not know that there is a homeless situation there. For instance, in the past year, the school statistics, because the schools are required now to report unhoused students and to get assistance for them. And in the last year, we had 80 adults and 90 children who came just to us for assistance. That's not Catholic Charities. That's not FLACRA's numbers. That's just us. So the 35 students that were identified in the city of Canandaigua as homeless doesn't capture the full picture. There are 90 children that contacted us, and we don't even know that everyone that was reported to a school contacted us.
So why do you think this is happening?
There's a few things at play. The Finger Lakes region has really developed with kind of the special wineries and specialty foods, and they're really trying to make Canandaigua kind of a resort community. Seniors come in and stay in the apartments and that are down by the lake, and many families come in over the weekend. The properties along the lake are listed for over $1 million now. So what that's done, if you look at your average median income, our income level is really high. But that's because we have these top end people who are making lots of money that live on the lake, and their income goes into the mix.
Right. When at the end of the day, most people are not making a lot of money.
Right. And so our county hasn't received as much funding as other counties who have a better way of counting people. The other issue is that once the community kind of turned over and started to be a vacation location, a lot of landlords, after surviving the moratorium, decided that they were not renewing people's leases. They were going to fix up the apartments or just raise the rent and have those people leave through no fault of their own, simply because the landlord decided that they wanted to charge more rent. I was walking out of an apartment complex with a client about a month ago, and a man walked out right in front of me and said, "They just raised my rent $250 a month. I don't know what I'm going to do." So the rents are going up. People can't afford them. People are leaving the apartments, or if they owe the landlord for months and months, a lot of them are just leaving because they know that they can't pay it.
I mean, it's horrible. It's just, I mean, we definitely are looking at a housing, even the governor has recognized that we do have a housing crisis. And I guess she has a plan in place. Have you heard anything about what, the government plans to do or can do? And what would your advice be to, like, as somebody who works in the throes of it, what would you want to tell the governor? What do you think needs to change?
There are a lot of buildings that are being built. There are a lot of apartment complexes that are being built everywhere. We would like them to set aside just a few units. If you just set aside a few apartment units in every complex that you built and said, we are going to charge fair market rent, which is what HUD will pay if you are on Section 8. If you agree to pay those rates, we will work with people, we will screen them, we background check them. You know that someone who comes to you who has been referred from us has had like deep dive counseling. And I don't mean counseling in terms of therapy. I mean, we've looked at the entire family to see if there are educational needs, if a person knows how to drive. I've taught people how to drive in my car so that they could get a license, so they could get to work. We just really look at whatever barrier there is and try to take care of the barrier.
So, what, I guess, in terms of homelessness, like, are we looking at right now crisis level rates of homelessness, and where do people go?
Well, that's it. If you are a family that has good rapport with your extended family, then you may go and live with them for a little while. What's happening though is that, landlords are saying, hey, there's too many people in this apartment, and they're either evicting everybody, both families, or saying if this other family doesn't leave, you will be evicted. So there's just not enough inventory that is affordable. That some of the apartment complexes they're building in this area, 2-bedroom apartments, $2,000. Who can afford that, really? And what they're asking is, 3 times your salary, has to be, reported. And if you don't have salary, if you have Section 8 and you have disability because you have a mental health issue, you're not going to have the amount of money that they're looking for as a minimum to get into the apartment complexes. It's the not in my backyard. Nobody wants to have an apartment complex built that is affordable housing in their neighborhood. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants a shelter. And I think that's one of my big beefs in Ontario County is that they don't want a shelter anywhere.
A
And right,
homeless.
they don't want a homeless shelter. So we are the shelter, but we take families. There really isn't any place for singles. And so the overflow goes into hotel rooms, and they're really cheap, not nice apartments. Or hotel rooms that they stay in. And, I had a client, she was there with her 5 children. One was a newborn, and here they all were just in like one room. And she was trying to homeschool the kids. I mean, it was ridiculous. And because of the size of the family, you won't find 3-bedroom apartments they can afford. They can't afford 4-bedroom apartments. And yet the size of their families require that they have that.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. And I guess what other things should we be talking about when it comes to homelessness in the region?
There's a lot of really good people doing good work. The Boys and Girls Club in Geneva is spectacular. He has, outreach to so many families with food and after school care. FLACRA does a great job with people who are having addiction issues. But their housing only houses singles. It doesn't house families. So if you are a family and you have a parent that has an addiction problem, you can't get housing through FLACRA. What else do I want to tell you? People think that, their own personal financial struggles, are the worst they can be. And I can tell you, like, there are people who are so far worse. I had a mom and she had 5 children, and she left our shelter and she moved in with her sister. And her sister had 2 children and a husband, and the house was too full and it was too chaotic. And so she got kicked out and she wound up in this hotel room. So then CPS came, Child Protection Services, and said, this is not good for your children to be all in this location. We moved them into our shelter, and the kids had just had it. They'd been on the road for a year, and they were just like, we're done. And her son that had mental health issues had a really, really hard time. And CPS wound up coming and taking all the children. And mom was on her own, and she has mental health issues that are unresolved, and she had a car accident, was injured, and that's unresolved. And so she hasn't had her children since April. And, I look at that whole situation and I think if she hadn't lost the house in the beginning because it was full of mold, then she wouldn't have wound up, in our shelter, and ultimately would not have had her children removed, and not given back right now. So things get really crazy in a family when there's no permanent housing.
Absolutely. And I guess that kind of ties into, like, for you, Brenda, like, obviously you're very passionate about this. So why do you do what you do? And how do you do what you do? This is a challenging job and position, I'm sure. So what drives you?
Equity. I want people that are in my program to be treated with as much respect, and given the same chance with housing and employment that everyone else is. And you're just so limited. If you don't have resources, you don't have the right clothes to wear for an interview, you're not on your game. So it's very hard. So we try to put all those pieces back together again for people.
And I guess what would be something that people might not know about housing issues and homelessness in our region that may not be obvious to them, or something that you think that people don't know that they ought to?
the families that are homeless that we're talking with, now granted, there are some single individuals that are chronically homeless. There are a few families that are chronically homeless. And so you may not be able to help them, but I get up every day because I know that somebody's in their car with their kids and I just need to get them out of there, and that's my priority. When we look at the shelter and people say, well, I'm next on your list. So that means I get an apartment next. And there's so much tragedy going on right now that I have to put the most vulnerable family in next. So if you're in a car, you're going to come ahead of somebody who maybe was on my waiting list for a long time. It doesn't mean we aren't going to work with you. We hired a prevention worker to work with the families that we don't have room for. And then she goes and meets with them in their hotel rooms, or they come here if they don't have a place, if they're just in their car. And she comes and works with all those families and tries to pull out the most vulnerable from those also, so that we're being the most responsive that we can. The apartments are expensive, they're grant funded, and that grant funding will be gone at the end of September. So we need to decide, where we're going to be, whether we're going to create kind of a static site, which is a model they use in Buffalo. And the static site brings all the families to one location and they stay right there. So all of our administrative staff would be in that building, 6 families would be in that building, and the case management staff that work with them. We find that if you're seeing the families every single day, there's more motivation to keep them working at it. Sometimes I think, every now and again, we get a family that gets into an apartment and is like, whew, finally, a bed to sleep in, that kind of thing. And so maybe they linger a little longer than they need to.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Brenda. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Is there anything else that you want to add before we sign off?
We just want people to support the local initiatives in their communities to help families that are struggling.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brenda. Bye.